Welcome to the Republican Professor. I'm your host and my own host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. Today we have a reading from Psalm 23 in the King James Version. We have a reading from Screams in the Desert, January 10th, and we're getting back into and finishing, hopefully today, the 7-day waiting period New Mexico case for transfer of firearms, the injunctive relief that was entered in by the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. We're finishing the majority opinion in that decision today. And the case is styled as Ortega versus Grisham, I believe, something like that. So we're going to finish that today. We're going to have that as it's really a silly prohibition to require a 7-day wait for firearms transfers. It's also unconstitutional, as the 10th Circuit seems to indicate their belief that it is unconstitutional, likely, saying that they're going to likely um, succeed on the merits of that. That's why they're entering injunction. This will be the second episode in that topic. And I love talking about silly prohibitions. In fact, the keyword silly prohibition occurs. We're ranked number 6. We were ranked number 5 several weeks ago. So we got to get the silly prohibition rank back up there. The ironic thing about this SEO keyword ranking is I don't really track this stuff. Somebody else tracks it. And I don't really care. I don't think I've ever used the term silly prohibition besides this episode, and yet we were ranked number 5 out of millions of podcasts. So there's probably only hundreds of thousands that are active. I think there's only like a 500,000 that are active on Apple Podcasts, but we're in the top 3% for government. Um, Up from 10% a couple years ago. We rank number 1 right now for transformative readings, which is the methodology I use in class. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and enter this into the record right now before we read Psalm 23. I hope you don't mind. Um, but I'd like to enter this into the record if I can find it. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and enter this into the record really quick. Okay, if you followed me any time on Instaparallelogram or Facebook or MyFace or Spacebook, I'm on Twitter too, but I don't really do a whole lot on Twitter. You'll see these text-rich updates that I do, and I came across a description of my classroom experience that is relevant to how I run the podcast. This classroom experience description was from a couple of years ago. Okay. And I say on October 7th, 2023, my methodology at APU this semester has been reading slowly through books, sprinkling lectures and discussions around as we go. Books that are over their heads because they are so far behind in basic skills and knowledge. It has been grueling work. My patience has been and continues to be tested. The ignorance of basic things is astounding, but they keep showing up. So I meet them exactly where they are at, and I muster all the kindness and patience that the Holy Spirit grants me. My upperclassman, a history major, has also been patient and kind with a very small class of freshmen. I have felt recently that I am being slowly tortured to death and that I'm in hell. A little while ago, I posted a photo here on Facebook in my books album where I keep a log of sorts of books for myself mainly. It was one of my texts on the response to 9/11 for international relations, the course I'm teaching for freshmen at APU. This is October 7th, 2023. The comments I got on that book were some of them so abhorrently incurious, intellectually vicious, and ignorant, pridefully so, which is the worst kind of ignorance. I felt like, again, like I was slowly being tortured to death, like I'm in hell. I will continue providing as much patience as I can as I do this slow, grueling work. If I see those kind of comments again on my life's work, I may throw out some lightning bolts, bolts of lightning. This is grueling work. I will continue as long as I'm able, but I am weary and discouraged at the astounding intellectual vice around me on all sides and the lack of preparation the institutions to do what they've been called to do. What I wanted to highlight for you about that was the issue of, well, frankly, my methodology, like I mentioned, the methodology has been reading through books, carefully through books. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, for the people on YouTube, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Feel free to call me Sharon. I mean, I don't mind if you call me Sharon. This is my Spacebook or my face. Why, I forget what do they call it. Let me go ahead and find where Prudy Martin, there we go. Okay, so that's the post I was talking about that I just mentioned. Looks like Tedla liked that. Tedla came on the podcast. All right, Tedla, yeah, buddy. All right. Yeah, reading slowly through books, sprinkling lectures and discussion around as we go. Books that are over their heads because they're so far behind in skills and knowledge. It's been grueling work. Now, I want to share this with you because this is a methodology I came up with for the purpose of teaching as a response to how poorly prepared the students were. It's like nothing I'd ever seen, and it was getting worse and worse and worse up to 2020. Of course, 2020 made it way worse because of the lockdowns. Let me show you something from before 2020. Would you like to see this? Okay. I say, seriously, please pray for me the next week or two. This is October 7th, 2015. I'm about to attempt the impossible, I say. This is a Spacebook post. I'm going to teach on government property on the government's dime in a room lit by Democrats using taxpayer money, Street Augustine's political writings. Someone told me they think it's St. Augustine, but I told them, well, I've seen that on like an envelope, like in the mail. I think it's Street Augustine. But anyway, political writings, mainly the City of God. Yes, that was a joke about Street Augustine, FYI. To a class totally ignorant of the Bible. They are completely biblically illiterate. They won't make it past the second page of the introduction without 5 scripture references. This is at Moorpark College. I didn't say it in the post, but it's Moorpark College Political Philosophy. This will necessitate explication of what Christianity is and rabbit trails galore. Rabbit trails galore sounds like a Bond film. And I'm just glad they have me, a philosopher with lots of biblical training, to set them right on that. How many philosophy profs have MAs in biblical studies and politics? I'm the only one I know of. Of course, now I have a PhD in uh, public law and American politics, but I did not at the time. So I feel uniquely suited and called to this challenge, but I really would like your prayer for me on this matter if you are so inclined. Thank you. And then I'm still reading the October 7th, 2015 Facebook my face post. And then after the midterm, I'm going to compare Hegel with Augustine's philosophy of history and politics. They'll get Hegel because he doesn't really give a damn about the Bible, and he's frankly more Darwinistic in a way. That's a concept they understand. They are being educated by Democrats, so everything is evolution and survival of the fittest. They ate up my application of Ari's politics to the Declaration of Independence. That's Aristotle. I call him Ari. And some Federalist Papers and parts of the Constitution. They ate up Republic, what we got to. That's from Plato. God, please help me keep the momentum going. It's a sizable class, and we might actually pull several of these kids through and onto the other side. One of them ended up going to Columbia to finish his degree, Ivy League schools. A lot of them, many of them went on. I'm glad I was able, and I got some complaints from them, including the one from Columbia, the one that went over to Columbia, the Ivy League. Um, but you know what? Later, he told me after he'd graduated from Columbia, he went from this course to Ivy League in New York City. He said, I was pretty much the only one prepared him for that. There's other, I'm just let that sink in. There's other feedback I got from that course that I had documented some other ways. My memory is not as good as it used to be, but so I don't remember names or anything very much, but I do remember I was teaching at Cal State Northridge Philosophy Department and Business Department during that time, and one of the students from that Moorpark College class drove down the 118 from Simi Valley to San Fernando Valley, up over the Santa Susana Pass. It's not a long drive. It's without traffic, it's probably about a half hour. Um, but this student came and parked at CSU, found me. I think I'm remembering this right. I can't remember why he came. Was he making up a midterm or was he making up a final or something? But he just hung out. It was the end of the semester. It might have been that he came to talk about his grades or something like that, because I preferred talking about grades in office hours. That's my go-to was always to have personalized, individualized attention where they feel a sense of accountability that's personal with how they're performing in class. I'm not trying to shame them. It's not that. It's that they do end up feeling a bit shame though, and that helps sometimes. But also praise. I can praise them, and it doesn't go down the freaking black hole of their souls. I could put it in writing too, I mean, for later, but I'm not sure they read my comments or they even understand them. So anyway, this kid came, and I think he ended up going to one of the UCs, UC Santa Barbara or something like that. And I remember he was black. And I remember we just ended up talking about the Republican Party and blacks. And he said he was totally astonished. He had no idea. I mean, basically, the sum of it was the political philosophy course I taught on this government campus was life altering for his personal understanding of the world. And I have these descriptions on my Spacebook. Now, I want to link this with what's going on with the podcast right now. Here's an update I just did. TRP podcast is in the top 3% of government podcasts on Apple, up from the top 10% a couple of years ago. And for the methodology I've developed from the classroom, an SEO tracked keyword, I don't track it, but other people do. Transformative readings. It's now ranked number 1 on Apple Podcasts, up from number 4 several weeks ago, for transformative readings. On the tracked keyword silly prohibitions, TRP fell from number 5 to number 6. So I'm doing a silly prohibitions episode today on the New Mexico 7-day waiting period for firearms transfers to get that puppy up to number 1 as well. Doing a transformative reading of the 10th Circuit's U.S. Appeals Court injunctive relief decision from August 2025 as a means to that end. The disappointing classroom experience has helped me develop fruitful methodology which can cross-pollinate from classroom to virtual classroom and back again, like The Hobbit, there and back again, fighting the darkness off one sentence, one step at a time. Oh, I just noticed something. Darren came on the podcast, professor at Biola University of Politics, and Matt Stone was in my political philosophy class. Not that one, but not the one from 2015, but the one from 2008. Okay, at Moorpark College too. So I told you that I was going to do a little bit of the backstory of TRP podcast. We just got a tiny taste of it today because I got this email about the rankings and we're ranked number 1 for transformative readings. The methodology I developed as a response to what I was seeing in the classroom, which is woeful underpreparedness and a need to go slowly and, well, frankly, try to get these kids' resilience up by exposing them to discipline reading. What better way to do it? So this is encouraging for me, and I know it's probably encouraging for you. We're gonna go ahead and go to Psalm 23, one of the most encouraging psalms. And this copy is the Holy Bible, Antioch Baptist Church. Antioch Baptist Church, baby. They call it Antioch there in Humboldt. This version is the King James version. And for some reason, Psalm 23 in this one comes right after Psalm 22 and right before Psalm 24. Not really sure why they did it that way, but the good news is that you can find Psalm 23 pretty easily as long as you know where Psalm 22 is and Psalm 24 is, because it's right in the middle of those. So what I typically do is I look for Psalm 21 because that's right before Psalm 22. And so I know that if I can find Psalm 21, I can find Psalm 22. And then I can find Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea. Woo! Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. A moment of reflection. According to this bookmarker I have in this Antioch Baptist Antioch Baptist Church Bible, July 3rd, 2005, Brother Bill Epsy is preaching on "For government is God's servant for your good," Romans 13:4. Must have been a July 4th sermon. And that is Bill Epsy, right? Yeah, Dr. Bill Epsy. I think he's still the pastor there. The last time I went to a service there was in December, past December 2024. We have grave stones there. We have gravestones. We have grave burial plots there, my wife and I. Streams in the Desert is next. We got January 10th today. Why am I doing these? Well, I started before Charlie Kirk was murdered, just a few days before. And now that he's been murdered and the Democrats have more clearly to millions of other people brought their toxicity down upon innocent life. They've been doing that for a long time, but it's now more obvious. And I think what we've seen is we're in a desert period for our culture, to be sure. I'm not sure we're going to come out of it, but we're going to make the most of it while we're here. That's how I look at it. Streams in the Desert, January 10th. Kalman Publications, Los Feliz Station, Los Angeles, California, 1925, years after Jesus. Of course, this episode is 8 October, 2025 years after Jesus. It's a Wednesday today. They were forbidden of the Holy Ghost to preach the word in Asia. Acts 16:6. This is January 10th, Streams in the Desert. It is interesting to study the methods of his guidance as it was extended towards these early heralds of the cross. It consisted largely in prohibitions when they attempted to take another course than the right. When they would turn to the left, to Asia, he stayed them. When they sought to turn to the right, to Bithynia, again, he stayed them. In after years, Paul would do some of the greatest work of his life in that very region, but just now the door was closed against him by the Holy Spirit. The time was not yet ripe for the attack on these apparently impregnable bastions of the kingdom of Satan. We're on page 11 at the top. Apollos must come there for his pioneer work. Paul and Barnabas are needed yet more urgently elsewhere and must receive further training before undertaking this responsible task. Beloved, whenever you are doubtful as to your course, submit your judgment absolutely to the Spirit of God and ask him to shut against you every door but the right one. Say, Blessed Spirit, I cast on thee the entire responsibility of closing against my steps any and every course which is not of God. Let me hear thy voice behind me whenever I turn to the right hand or the left. In the meanwhile, continue along the path which you have been already treading. Abide in the calling in which you are called, unless you are clearly told to do something else. The Spirit of Jesus waits to be to you. O pilgrim, what he was to Paul. Only be careful to obey his least prohibition, and where, after believing prayer, there are no apparent hindrances, go forward with enlarged heart. Do not be surprised if the answer comes in closed doors. But when doors are shut right and left, an open road is sure to lead to Troas. There Luke awaits. That's me. Hi. And visions will point the way where vast opportunities stand open and faithful friends are waiting. Paul by Meyer. Is there some problem in your life to solve? Some passage seeming full of mystery? God knows who brings the light, who brings the hidden things to light. He keeps the key. Is there some door closed by the Father's hand, which widely open to you had hoped to see? Trust God and wait, for when he shuts the door, he keeps the key. Is there some earnest prayer unanswered yet, or answered not as you had thought would be? God will make clear his purpose by and by, and he keeps the key. Have patience with your God, your patient God, all wise, all knowing, no terrier he. And of the door of thy future life, he keeps the key. Unfailing comfort, sweet and blessed rest, to know of every door he keeps the key. That he at last, when just he sees 'tis best, will give it thee. Says Anonymous. Okay. Streams in the Desert, January 10th. Moment of reflection. All right. Let's get to work. I'm not sure if we're going to finish. We're going to try. But we're on we're on page 16 of this wonderful injunctive relief, starting at number 2, presumptive lawful conditions on firearm sales. And we finished there last time. I'm going to show you my screen, okay, of the Republican professor U-Boob. Here's the U-Boob for the Republican professor. And we went through the Second Amendment decision about a month ago. It looks like here's the date, August 29th. Okay, so that's where we went through up until number 2. So we're going to finish, if we can, Ortega versus Grisham, I believe it is. Samuel Ortega versus Michelle Lujan Grisham. Number 2. But Heller also carved out certain laws from the exacting historical scrutiny that followed in Bruin and Rahimi. Heller declined to examine long-standing prohibitions, including laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. That's quoting Heller at note 36, 626 to 627. In a footnote, the court referred to these laws as presumptively lawful regulatory measures. How many of you guys know where this is going? Dicta. That's right, dicta. Good, good. Those laws were supported without any explanation of how they would fare in light of the Second Amendment's original meaning. The summary treatment foreclosed the possibility of a more sophisticated interpretation. Despite this lack of explanation, despite the passage's status as dicta, okay, dicta, you don't know this term dicta, you probably should get to know it. And despite the possible tension between Heller's dictum and its underlying holding, yeah, you think? These categories have been carried forward and enmeshed into Second Amendment jurisprudence. Very interesting. Very interesting observation about dicta and the holding of the court. Are they in tension or are they not in tension? That's something that the Supreme Court presumably would be interested in answering. And I'm not sure if he really believes that there is a tension or if it's just an excuse by Democrats on the courts. We recently held that some longstanding prohibitions, such as minimum age limits, not only survive Bruin and Rahimi, but they also presumptively do not burden the Second Amendment. He's talking about Rocky Mountain gun owners versus Polis, 2024. Still, courts have only partially fleshed out the boundaries of these commercial conditions and qualifications in other Second Amendment challenges, and we acknowledge the lack of fully fleshed out guidance on these safe harbor provisions. There's a footnote 4, and I'm not going to comment on that. I just have a check mark in my physical copy here. Okay, let me I have a physical copy that I look at when I'm doing the podcast here. So, okay, I covered what I wanted to cover as far as dicta goes. And the issue of fleshing out these safe harbor provisions that Heller dicta seem to give to the Democrats. The Democrats want those safe harbors from Second Amendment protection. Well, safe harbors for regulation, not safe harbors for individuals. Let's get clear about that. When Democrats think of a safe harbor, they think of for their regulation on individuals. When Republicans think of a safe harbor, they think of individuals protected from government infringement. So it's a little bit confusing if you're reading this quickly and you're not paying attention. Okay, we just finished 17, but even in this murky territory on page 18 at the top, the Waiting Period Act falls far short of a presumptively constitutional law. It's not limited to commercial sales. Ooh, big red flag. And it does not fit with other known conditions and qualifications in this category. First, cooling off periods are not tailored to commercial sales. Same in California. They are imposed on many non-commercial transfers, while many commercial transfers are excluded. Heller carved out laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. Very insightful. But the Waiting Period Act does not distinguish between commercial and non-commercial. That's a huge problem there. While the statute refers only to buyers and sellers, it seems to exclude gifts, and seems to exclude gifts. It seems to exclude gifts. How can there be a buyer and seller if it's a gift? Not every exchange of a firearm for money is commercial in nature. For example, A collector selling firearms to a museum collection must wait 7 days. If a hobbyist with a federal firearms license to sell a gun to a friend, he must still wait 7 days. A waiting period cannot solely be a qualification on commercial sales if it applies equally to non-commercial conduct. True. Some non-commercial transfers, such as those between immediate family members, are excluded from the statute, but that small carve-out is thin gruel. Thin gruel indeed, buddy. Thin gruel indeed. All right, we just finished page 18. We're on page 19 at the top. Other entries in the list of exceptions reveal that many explicitly commercial sales are not affected by the waiting period. For instance, a purchaser with a federal firearms license does not have to wait 7 days. As a result, transaction between manufacturers, distributors, gun stores, progenitor, commercial firearm sales will not be subject to the waiting period. Since nearly every firearm bought by an individual in New Mexico must first be sold to a distributor with a federal firearms license, there's at least one explicitly commercial sale exempted for every prospective sale subject to the waiting period. Very interesting. Added to the exclusion for law enforcement agencies and officers who often purchase bulk firearms, at least half of all commercial sales in Mexico will not be affected by the Waiting Period Act. I like what you're saying. Thus, it cannot be said that the waiting period subjects only commercial sales to a condition or qualification. The criteria for what transfers are affected by the law have nothing to do with the sale's commercial nature. What is he doing here? He's saying, we're calling your bluff. You say, Democrats, that the law is constitutional. The Waiting Period Act in New Mexico is constitutional. Why? Because in Heller, 2008, Scalia, which we're not totally comfortable with how he worded certain things, but he did mostly a good job. But there's this dicta, or there's these dicta, I should say, because it's plural, dicta is plural. There's a dictum, which is not essential to the holding. It's just something he said. It's an aside. So it's not really law in the holding of the court, that seem to indicate that laws restrictions on qualifications that are commercial in nature to the commercial sale of firearms, there's some wiggle room for Democrats to play around with and get their jollies. And so Democrats latched onto that part of the decision, and they're like, yeah, we can shove all of every fantasy we've ever had about gun control will go in now in that safe harbor for regulation, which is the dictum that that Scalia mentions in Heller. Okay. And if you forgot what that was, because you've lost brain cells here, it's right on the top of page 17, bottom of page 16. The issue here of presumptively regulatory measures. Laws imposing conditions and qualifications on commercial sale of arms. That's from Heller, the famous decision in 2008, note 36, which you can see at 626 to 627. Now, I would love to show you how to get there. All you do is you just go to Google Scholar, go to Giggle Scholar. Okay. And you can get to Google Scholar by searching go to Bing and search DuckDuckGo. When you have DuckDuckGo, search Google Scholar. It'll probably be the third or fourth one down. And and then you'll see something like this. Okay? You go to Heller versus DC. Actually, it's District of Columbia versus Heller because DC lost at the lower court 3-judge panel. Clicky little wiki, and then look for page 627. It starts at 554. Oh, sorry, it starts at 570. 554 is the number of the volume that you'd see in the law library. Page 570 is where it'll be. And so they got the pagination messed up here. Oh, I hate that. They're using different pagination. They're using this pagination right here. Well, anyway, you'd want to use this other pagination. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to say, let's do commercial. Okay, here it is. This is probably the syllabus here. Yeah, I don't like the syllabus. I'm searching commercial, the word commercial. And I just found it. It's in Roman numeral 3. So if you just search the word commercial, you'll find it, even on this pagination, which is a different pagination. Or you can just go to the law library. You can also find the other pagination somewhere else, I'm sure. I just haven't had a chance. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. So that's what he's talking about. The Democrats, this is an anti-Democrat decision right here. The District of Columbia versus Heller. The Democrats lost 5-4. Okay. And when you see who is on this is a major Second Amendment case. Okay. Look, Justice Scalia delivered the opinion of the court. Well, that's a Republican. Roberts, Republican. Kennedy, Republican, appointed by Reagan. Thomas, Republican. Bush Sr. Alito, Republican. Bush Jr. Stevens, I think he was appointed by Ford. Boo. Man, it sucks. Souter, Bush, Ginsburg, Clinton, Breyer, Clinton. So you basically have the Democrats in the dissent with a couple of crappy Republicans, but it's all Republicans in the majority. And they love what Scalia did here. They love it. Oh, they're like, yeah, we lost, but there's hope for gun control. We're going to stick all our gun control and we're going to base it on this. So waiting period goes right there. Well, the problem is that's dicta. Dicta. It's dicta. It's not essential to the holding. It's just like it's like something he just said. You know, it's like he's shooting the bull almost. It's not essential. So the closer that it is to the holding of the court, essential to that, the stronger it is for being precedent, something you can hang your hat on legitimately. So the 10th Circuit here, again, these are Republicans versus Democrats on the 10th Circuit. It's the same team. Same teams are playing here, okay? You think, well, it's not the same team. It is the same teams. I'm not wasting your time here. It's the same teams. The Republicans are again going, okay, don't get too excited, Democrats. You can't put the waiting period and all of your other fantasies in whatever dicta you pull out of Heller. That's what their game is. Okay. I hope that makes sense. We're on page 19. Second, the Waiting Period Act does not impose a condition or qualification like other restrictions considered presumptively constitutional. In Heller, the court listed long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places, such as schools, government buildings, or laws imposing conditions and qualification on the commercial sale of arms. So that's that same passage I just mentioned from the District of Columbia versus Heller, right? That's the same passage. Here it is in Heller, right? This is all dicta, though. That passage is dictum, is a dictum. So what about that? Is that precedent for what the Democrats want to do and have done here in the state of New Mexico? When I keep saying Democrats, I don't want you to think I'm being partisan. I'm being descriptive. It's part of the description. It's like looking at the mountains where I grew up in Colorado and seeing that they have snow on the top. It's not partisan to say that. It's a description of what I'm seeing. New Mexico is run by Democrats. When you bring the description a little clearer and you don't avoid describing the political phenomenology, is clarified and it's accurate so that you know what you're dealing with here. Nobody is served if you get the political phenomenology backwards or unclear. It's not helpful. It might be polite, but we're not dealing with being polite. We're dealing with being accurate and clear. You have to understand these kids, when they're coming up, they don't know anything, man. You have to say it. Just say it. Like John Mayer said, say what you need to say. In McDonald versus City of Chicago, shitty of Chicago, that came out accidentally. It sounds kind of funny though, especially in that context of McDonald. In McDonald versus City of Chicago, again, run by Democrats. The City of Chicago entirely run by Democrats, just like DC versus Heller. DC versus Heller, District of Columbia, entirely run by Democrats. You have to start seeing that, it's not like they're wearing jerseys like it's the Super Bowl and that you can see just by the color of their helmet. No, it's not a color thing. It's but it's just as descriptive and it's just as accurate as saying the Broncos have the blue helmets. In McDonald versus City of Chicago, by the way, Otis McDonald was black, and the City of Chicago spent millions of dollars to disarm him in 2010 during Obama. Something exactly that the Klan was famous for, trying to disarm a black man. The court reiterated that such long-standing regulatory measures were not imperiled by the Second Amendment. Okay, so you have similar dicta there. And in Bruin, in an apparent nod to these categories, the court noted that shall issue licensing regimes under which ordinary citizens presumptively qualify for licenses unless investigation reveals otherwise are meant to ensure that purchasers were law-abiding, responsible citizens. Okay. And because they use only narrow, objective, definite standards, they were not constitutionally suspect. But a cooling off period is not such a condition or qualification. So what this judge is saying here, this Republican judge on the 10th Circuit is saying, you don't get to use this as the dicta safe harbor because it's distinguishable from what is described in those dicta. A cooling off period is not such a condition or qualification. Plaintiffs argue that it is not a condition because it cannot be met by any action, and it is not a qualification because it is universally applicable. They are right. A 7-day waiting period is not a condition on a sale. any more than a price of a firearm is. The sale happens regardless, and the waiting period is just an artificial delay on possession. Stick that on a coffee mug, put that on a calendar, that goes on a magnet on your refrigerator. It goes on your toolbox in the garage. It's a bumper sticker. It is March in Centerfold and Natural Right magazine, baby. The sale happens regardless, and the waiting period is just an artificial delay on possession. Love that. Page 20. That's the quote of the day right there, baby. Nor is it a qualification. For that would imply that a buyer who has not waited 7 days is somehow presumptively unqualified to purchase a firearm, an obviously unconstitutional implication. Yeah, yeah. Page 21. It is not enough that a regulation sometimes affects a commercial sale. A blanket waiting period is simply not of a kind with the conditions and qualifications imposed by other presumptively lawful measures. Yeah. By New Mexico's logic, adopted by the dissent, which is a Democrat, an outright ban on commercial sales would also be a condition or qualification on commercial sales and presumptively lawful. That's a reductio ad absurdum form of argument right there. The conclusion is absurd. Therefore, you must go back and see what the problem was with the premises or the reasoning, the inference, the logic, to say it a different way. New Mexico points to a concurrence in the Ninth Circuit for support, which argued that California's waiting period is a condition or qualification on the sale of guns. It imposes a brief delay to permit compliance with background check requirements and provide a cooling off period as a prerequisite for acquiring a gun. Sylvester versus Harris. By the way, that is Kamala Harris. Yep. 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 Kamala Harris. I did an episode about that.
You did?
Yes, I did. Did an episode about that on the pre-Republican professor. You want to know where it is? Actually, did an entire series on that, the waiting period. When Kamala Harris was a defendant in California, she violated civil rights. Actually, civil rights is being nice. Constitutional rights, according to a Democrat judge. 37 views 1 year ago. This one has 23 views. Justice Thomas on Sylvester versus Harris. California's 10-day waiting period. Judge Anthony Ishii. 3 different. So you have 5 episodes on the California waiting period. I did on the run up to the 2024 election. And I'm almost certain that so I hope this helps. In other words, we dodged a bullet, man, in 2024. Holy crap. Holy freaking crap, we dodged a bullet. Dude, we got to keep working though, man. Keep it up. Keep it up. But that view never garnered a majority on any court. By the way, how do we keep working? We have unity. We have unity. And listen up here, guys. We have unity. I saw Tucker's take on Dan Crenshaw. I watched the entire thing with Steve Toth. He seems like a really nice guy. I do like Tucker. So it's going to sound a little bit odd for me to say this, but I was not impressed with Tucker's takedown of Dan Crenshaw at all. I have been listening to Dan Crenshaw's podcast for a long time. I've listened to a lot of his episodes, and anybody who's listened for any length of time will know that you need more than two examples. And Tucker only gives you two examples in that. To the default would be that Dan Crenshaw is entitled to his opinion. It might be wrong about Ukraine or whatever it is. Maybe it is. But the description of him is definitely wrong on Tucker. And it's something that you could only see if you spent a lot of time listening to Dan Crenshaw, which I have. And Tucker doesn't even come close to correctly describing him. I have no stake in this, but my point is this kind of infighting that we have in the Republican Party, it's healthy to a certain extent, but if you do it too much, there's a fragmentation and fracturing that occurs, and the Democrats come. Kamala Harris will come and regulate the shit out of you. Sorry for cussing. I mean, it's worse than that. It's worse than that, man. It's a lot worse, as you saw. It came out on Charlie Kirk. It's a lot worse than that. I mean, look at what they're trying to do in California right now. They're trying to get rid of all Republicans in the Congress. 40% voted for 40% of Californians voted for the Republican last presidential election. They're trying to get rid of any kind of reflection of that in the Congress for California. I'm sensitive to this and I see it accurately, political phenomenologically, because I see what they did with the campuses when the Republicans just gave up and gave them the campuses. That's what happened at taxpayer expense. When the Republicans gave up in the South at taxpayer expense, after the Civil War, they gave up, man. There's something else I want to read you. And I'm looking for it right now. Yeah, I found it. These are some old updates I've done. So I'm going to go back to my space book and show you an update I did when Brett Kavanaugh was elected. Well, confirmed, I should say. Um, October 7th, 2018. What you saw was a non-passive Republican Party. That's what the context of this is. Brett Kavanaugh confirming to the U.S. Supreme Court after all of that craziness. I would show it on YouTube, but I'm a little bit afraid of getting this censored because I showed it on a Facebook Live one time, and I just realized I don't think I was showing my screen. They censored my Facebook Live when I showed the confirmation hearings. The first minute of the confirmation hearings, Kamala Harris was interrupting. I'd never seen that in a confirmation hearing. That's when I knew something was going on. There was some kind of evil spirit presence there. Remember, that was before the accusations of sexual misconduct. That occurred right before the vote. Remember, Dianne Feinstein held on to that. So apparently, the stuff that Kamala Harris was doing to stop Kavanaugh from getting on the court, I mean, it sounds satanic. It was a cacophony of protesters there, just histrionic. And I was like, gee, I wonder what's happening here. So this is when he was confirmed. I wrote, what you saw recently was a non-passive political party. When was this? Sunday, October 7th, 2018 at 9:48 a.m. When the Republican Party was formed, it stood up to Democrat hegemony, tyranny, hatred of the Constitution in defense of law, order, and justice. Democrats insisted then, as now, that their extreme measures against the Constitution had the purpose of protecting their women from newly freed blacks. Republicans faltered in exhaustion. They made mistakes. Lincoln didn't have a bodyguard during a war with Democrats. Lack of common sense, the epitome of passivity. As a result, Democrats locked the South down self-righteously in terrorism, not unlike they've locked down your campuses for 90 to 100 years because Republicans didn't protect Lincoln. Had Lincoln lived, the Southern Democrat Andrew Johnson not immediately taken over, the Klan would have been strangled in the baby snake nest it crawled out of. As it was, we had to wait for Grant to do that. Stay sharp and non-passive people. My point here is that's an example of what I'm talking about. The splintering, the infighting makes Democrats stronger. Now, I understand there is a point and there's a process for this of purifying impure elements within our party. I understand that. You got Stevens and you got Souter on Heller. You know, they were Republicans and yeah, they flaked off with the Democrats. And there's always Democrats that do that. And that Tucker interview with that guy Steve Toth, who wants to unseat Dan Crenshaw, you know, he's in the state assembly and he tells the story of Republicans basically giving the state assembly chairmanship to a speakership to the Democrats. You know, sucks. Yeah. So I don't know where the line is. All I know is that there is a line and you don't want to go over it. There's a line where you become weaker, not stronger. And the disagreement is where that line is in practicality. The goal of this podcast is to make the line more obvious and more practical because to practical to enforce because we have voters on our side. If we don't have voters on our side, we have less wiggle room to do this. We need more people on our side, hearts and minds. But there's a lot of Republicans that where the perfect is the enemy of the good, and that's why Democrats win, and that's why they've caused so much damage. So we got to have more attentiveness, and we got to have more of an evangelism effort, a mission effort to get voters up to speed and educated and virtuous on this stuff. That's why I'm doing this. But that view never garnered a majority on any court. What view is that? The Ninth Circuit. The majority in Sylvester instead employed intermediate scrutiny under Heller, an approach later abrogated by Bruen. Yes. What did he just say? What did he just say? He just said that the California waiting period and cooling off period is vulnerable. That's what he just said. And Harris was on the wrong side of that. Kamala Harris, the presidential nominee for a major party last year. You're seeing all this, right? Tell me you're seeing all this. Rather than help New Mexico, Sylvester shows that courts have consistently held waiting periods impose burdens on the Second Amendment and are not presumptively constitutional. New Mexico and the dissent argue that our decision in RMGO, Rocky Mountain Gun Owners, forecloses the conclusion that the Second Amendment is burdened by a waiting period. But we explicitly declined to define the full scope of constitutional rights, if any, to keep and bear. We resolved that case instead by concluding that limiting firearm sales to those over 21 years old was a presumptively lawful condition or qualification. The dissent would do the same today, but it does so without any consideration for what defines a condition or qualification on a commercial sale. This is very good. Very good. Love this. It looks like I skipped something. Okay, I skipped a comment I made in my printout here. Let me go back up to page 21. Yeah, this standardless temporary disarmament measure, I thought was a very nice description of the waiting period. Yeah, that's great. It's on page 21. Standardless temporary disarmament measure. There's no limiting principle here. Anytime they come up with a number like days or number of rounds, it's just made up. Okay. Going back down here. The dissent would do the same today. It does so without any consideration for what defines a condition or qualification on a commercial sale. It is content to assume that any law which regulates only the selling and purchasing of firearms is presumptively constitutional. That shortcut analysis could prop up laws that lay heavy burdens on the rights of ordinary citizens. Yeah, that's the point. It's almost like that's the point. Without a glance at whether the supposed condition or qualification is in any way like others given safe harbor. In any event, RMGO did not grapple with the full scope of arguments defining conditions and qualifications that we face here, and declined to reach the issues that are most pertinent in this case. Yeah. Our decision today accords with RMGO. Now, if you read RMGO, you're probably very disappointed that he just said that. Is that, but remember, let me help you with this here. He's a lower court judge. And so as a lower court judge, he's bound by the U.S. Constitution, Article 3, which says, not interested in AI mode. Why would I want AI? Freaking idiots. Why is Apple assuming I want artificial intelligence? Moron alert. Morons. Morons. Here's Article 3. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court. Okay, there you go. One Supreme Court. How many Supreme Courts are there? One. One. And the rest are inferior. He's an inferior court judge. So he's bound by precedent. He can't on his own here overturn this precedent. An en banc decision might. Maybe that's what the next thing is. The Supreme Court can, but he can't. So he's trying to, stay in his lane as a lower court judge. So when he's saying his decision today accords with RMGO, what he's doing is, yes, RMGO has problems. Yes, this precedent has problems, no doubt about it. But he doesn't want to give anybody any excuse to overturn this. So he's not going to give them an excuse that it conflicts with precedent. He's not going to give them that excuse. Does that make sense? He's trying to thread the needle there to protect the Second Amendment. He's trying to be wise. Even with a presumption, New Mexico would not prevail. Just because a law is presumed constitutional does not mean it is constitutional. It may still be shown to burden Second Amendment rights. As we show below, waiting periods are neither long-standing nor widespread practices. That's a key point right there. And diverge from history and tradition. Again, another coffee mug quote. Put it on a calendar, put it on a coffee mug, on, it's a bumper sticker. You got it on your toolbox there, Craftsman tools. Plaintiffs would overcome any presumption of constitutionality. We're going to stop there. But we got that quote. That's a key quote. Let me go back to the other key quotes. Page 21 had a really nice way of just describing these waiting periods as standardless temporary disarmament measures. Oh, that's so good. And there was one more. I want you to remember that we did an entire 5-episode series on the Republican professor on the California waiting period. On page 20, in the middle there, he says that the waiting period is just an artificial delay on possession. That's a great quote. Of course, these dicta from Heller we're still battling. And the issue of no limiting principle is a key issue there as well. And he also says on page 21 at the bottom, remember that he seems to imply the Ninth Circuit now in California, that's what we have, the precedent of Sylvester versus Harris from 2016. That seems to be abrogated. The approach given there has been abrogated by Bruin, and so therefore is vulnerable. Okay, so we'll continue with number 3, starting on page 23, and we'll try to go to the end next time, 36. We had some extra stuff in the beginning of this episode. Thanks for joining me on the Republican Professor podcast. I've been my own host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. I've also been your host. I've enjoyed my time with you today. I very much enjoyed our Psalm reading of 23 in the King James Version. It's one of the most beautiful versions of the Bible. I would also like to point out to you on the Republican Professor podcast a wonderful selection we did on the King James Version of the Bible called Reading the Bible with the Founding Fathers by Dr. Daniel Dreisbach, J.D. D. Phil. And what I love about this episode, looks like it's got 129 views from 2022, November 23rd, 2022, which was Thanksgiving. 5 likes. Okay, great. Wonderful. Daniel Dreisbach was a Rhodes Scholar, and he did his DPhil in law, I think, under Finnis, I believe, at Oxford. Anyway, the dude is a stud. He's very biblically literate, and he's done this wonderful book called Reading the Bible with the Founding Fathers, Oxford University Press. And he talks, that's why I use the King James Version, because the King James Version is hugely influential in our heritage of the Second Amendment and the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. So I wanted to point that out to you as we get into the Thanksgiving season. It is Wednesday, October 8th, 2025 years after Jesus. We'll take care. See you next time.